All right, hey guys, so we are talking about Article 2 and the second branch of the U.S. federal government, the President, the VP, and the executive branch. So really quick, the first section of the Constitution deals with the roles of the President and the Vice President. So let's take a look at that. So there's some basics. One, there's a term of office, right, and two positions that need to get filled. So the President enforces the laws passed by Congress, and the President and the VP serve for 4-year terms, right? So this is set up in the Constitution. Additional kind of things that clarify that is the 12th Amendment puts a ticket, so it's kind of like a combo meal. You order a president and a vice president together rather than the first place person would be president and the runner-up would be the vice president. The 12th Amendment is created because there was a tie. Additionally, the 22nd Amendment limits 2 terms for all and every president once the amendment is passed. Really quick, just to clarify, guys, if you are taking notes, which I would highly recommend, I would just write down the underlined portions. That'll help kind of guide you. So let's move on. So the next thing on how to become president is kind of a goofy situation, at least different than the rest of the world, and that is the Electoral College. So there's an election, and the math works like this. There are 435 representatives across all the states in America. There are 100 senators, and then there are 3 Electoral College votes for the District of Columbia or Washington, D.C. And so that works out to this big number of 538. And these are actually the people who elect the president. So it's based on the popular vote. I'll explain that a little bit more. But there's a magic number that you have to reach, and that is 270. Once a presidential candidate reaches that number, or an incumbent, then they've earned the ability to become president. If there is no winner, right, there's a tie of 270, or neither side really reaches 270, the House and the Senate get to select the the House gets to select the president and the Senate gets to select the VP. So the 23rd Amendment gave some representation to D.C. because before they couldn't vote in presidential elections. We just already talked about the 12th Amendment, but essentially now there's a ticket, a VP and a president combo. So this is what it looked like in 2012. Here's a couple different looks, right? So this is the 2008 election, right? So this is in red how many states Senator McCain won when he was competing against Barack Obama, and this is how many our president won, and that number is substantially bigger, and so he ended up winning. We can see larger states like California and Florida and Texas and New York and Pennsylvania and Ohio. Hey-o. We have a decent amount of representatives where some states have, there's a minimum number of 3. So for some smaller states with kind of a less population, so they have less representatives. Some states have some different laws. So Nebraska, for example, has you can get partial electoral votes if you don't get a super majority of the votes. So if you don't get over 66%, you can get some of the electoral votes. The same goes with Maine, but all of Maine went for Obama in 2008. So this is what it looks like if we were to bunch up those numbers, right, as far as blocks of votes. And so we can see a lot of our bigger states, right, are pretty blocky, and some of our smaller states are pretty teeny, right? So this is the change, though. 2012, there were some differences. So there were some states that were lost, but Barack Obama continued to, win and maintain his presidency. Moving on, there's some dates. This one you don't necessarily need to write down, but it is in the Constitution, so it's worth writing down. So Congress gets to select the date, and historically they've chosen the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. So that's kind of hard to think about, but generally we call this the general election, right? When there's a presidential race, so like in 2012 and soon coming in 2016 and in the far future 2020. And then there are midterm elections. So this is halfway through a president's presidency. There's a midterm election, so just like there was one in 2014 here recently, and this is where the other half of kind of Congress not exactly half, but the other portion of Congress gets voted or runs for election. So qualifications, there's some things that presidents need to do. You can read our Constitution right here. I'll summarize it in this. You need to be native born, meaning born on American soil. You need to be 35 years old, and you need to have lived in the U.S. for the past 14 years. So some other things. There is one, again, kind of a constitutional description of what happens with vacancies. But essentially, the Doomsday Amendment, the 25th Amendment, states there's a succession of, if the president were to die, the VP takes over, and there were several other positions after this. And it also kind of clarifies that if the president's not able to serve, right, if he becomes disabled, or goes for surgery or whatever. So the quick roll is this: the VP, the Speaker, the President, the Pro Tempore, the Secretary of State, and then the Department of Homeland Security. That's kind of the succession line. Moving on, vacancies. Like I was just saying, but if the president and the VP are unable, Congress has the power to declare by law who becomes president. So that would be really interesting if that ever happened. Most presidents get their job, or VPs get their job by a president dying, resigning, or being removed, or being unable to do that. We've certainly seen these two, and for a temporary situation, some presidents have been unable to serve while they're going through medical procedures. So the 25th Amendment clarifies that. Moving on, salaries and benefits. The president does get paid, right? The original president got paid $25,000, and now the president makes $400,000 a year. And so with some additional $50,000 taxable expense, and he gets some travel and some entertainment money. Right, and he gets to live in two places, the White House and this place called Camp David, which is kind of his retreat. Some of the presidents, have some perks: big house, lots of staff, big old plane, right? Additionally, you can kind of look through if you're curious and pause here, but president's Cadillac One is really unlike any other car probably out there. Definitely not like my car. So lots of features that are pretty interesting, pretty safe automobile. Moving on, there's an oath the president has to take, right? And I do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of the President of the United States to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. So it's interesting, right? People aren't brought up, the people of the country, but it's assumed, right, if the president's fulfilling the constitutional roles, then probably the people will be protected and defended as well. So that is, Article 6, and that is administered by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court in front of the Capitol, right? So this is a real clarification that, yes, this person is legitimate, right? That all three branches of government are kind of coming together for this moment. And so we can see a couple moments, right? Barack Obama getting sworn in. This is what it looks like, kind of a pulled back view. So it's a pretty big event. Sometimes presidents walk from the White House to the Capitol to be sworn in, and other times they roll in on cars. And so we're going to get into Section 2 now, the powers of the president. So the power is pretty substantial now, but not necessarily by just the words that are in the Constitution. So you can read it right here. This is kind of the clarification of what happens for part of the power of the president. But essentially, the president is the commander-in-chief, right? He is in charge of the armed forces, whether he has any military experience or not. He's in charge. Additionally, he gets advice from departments called the cabinet. So these are the top positions for different branches of government. We'll talk more about that in just a little bit. And he can also have this power of reprieves and pardons. And this is pretty much unchecked. The president can pardon whoever he deems worthy of being, their crimes removed. He cannot, though, protect people from impeachment. Anyway, so there's our president and one before talking to troops, right? And treaties and appointments is another power. This is the constitutional language. Essentially, the president can make treaties, but then he has to get them approved by the Senate, and that's with a 2/3 majority. Right. Additionally, he can appoint ambassadors, Supreme Court justices, and federal judges, but once again, he has to get the stamp of approval from the Senate. And he does have, though, executive discretion. He can hire who he wants to work in the White House. So, for example, the chief of staff and lots of other staffers below that, the president can choose who he wants to work, who is going to be on his team, basically. So we talked about treaties, but the simplified version is this, right? The State Department is in charge of kind of the foreign policy of the country, and so he's also in charge of appointing all these kind of different positions, and the Senate just has to approve them. Occasionally they do not, though. Kind of is based on the political situation of the time. And if the Senate, though, is not in session, the president can make what's called a recess appointment. And this is, if the Senate's not working, then it's assumed the president can just choose somebody and they're automatically accepted. So sometimes presidents will wait for a recess appointment to approve some of the more maybe controversial appointments or things that the Senate are not necessarily thrilled about. Moving on, duties of the president look like this. Under the provision, the president delivers a State of the Union, right? So he is the chief of state, so he is in charge of all the kind of ceremonial functions. We'll see a couple pictures a little bit later on, things like state visits, visiting other countries. He gives the State of the Union each January, right? It kind of addresses Congress, says, this is my plan, this is what I would love to see happen in the country. Keeping in mind, right, Congress can do whatever it wants, but it does need the president's approval to do so. And it sets the goals, right? So he's kind of the chief legislator because he has that big veto pen. And we already said that, right? But the president doesn't always get what he or she wants, but we'll see. So some different shots, right, from the State of the Union. I really like the State of the Union outside of the whole clapping thing. The clapping thing gets old. But it is a political symbol of support or disapproval of the president's ideas and policies and maybe even himself. And so we see all kind of three branches, right? But the executive branch might be trying to grab, right? Take a grab. Some people have been accusatory of the executive branch being kind of a power-hungry branch. But I don't know. You know, it's a modern time, so maybe modern times call for a modern president. We'll talk more about that in class. And the last one, not the last, but getting there. So there's impeachment, right? The president can get kicked out if he commits treason, bribery, or other high crimes, right? And so could any president be impeached? Yes, they can, because we've had Andrew Johnson and Bill Clinton or William Clinton were impeached by the U.S. House, but they were both tried by the Senate and found not guilty, right? So the vote for Johnson was much closer. Clinton got off, and Nixon resigned. He would have probably been most certainly impeached. And there was talk of impeaching George W. Bush and Barack Obama, but neither has gone to a full session. And so we're going to stop it there. We're going to get into the president's roles in our next video.